Beautiful day here out in Humboldt, California, where I lived for 4 years. But I'm on vacation headed back to Hawaii, Oahu Island, where I've also lived for 4 years. So in this video, I'm going to talk about living in Humboldt and living in Hawaii and a little bit of travel. So if you're interested in living in either of these places, or if you have lived in either of these places, then you'll make sure to watch the video. You're going to learn from someone who's been doing this. So make sure to hit the thumbs up button, and welcome in fam, much love, Trav here. So let's start with what these places have in common and then get into the nitty gritty in living in these places. So both Humboldt, California and Hawaii have natural beauty, really beautiful places. Humboldt, California is on the Pacific coast. In the air, you get the ocean, you go swim, you can go surf, although it's cold. There's mountains, there's forests. It's just a really beautiful place. And any of the Hawaiian islands are going to be extremely beautiful as well. Great for the water. You're not against the Pacific, you're in the middle of the Pacific. So that's something that both of these places have in common, is beautiful scenery, although they're a little bit different because Hawaii has much warmer water. It's much and better surf, if you care about those things, better snorkeling, better water sports, whereas Humboldt has, depends where you are, but especially compared to Oahu, much better forest. Humboldt here has gorgeous, wonderful redwood forest, and that's unique almost in the world. Humboldt has like the biggest trees in the world, so if you're a forest lover, it's great. And compare the weather a bit. Both have kind of nice weather. If you prefer the heat, Hawaii is better, but Humboldt doesn't get too cold. I mean, it rains a lot more depending on where you are, but there's a lot of days like this where it's sort of cold and sprinkling. And the winters can be a little bit rough and dark. But I mean, it's not like in the middle of the country. I think the lowest it's going to drop is in the 40s, whereas Hawaii has incredibly wonderful winters. So there's an edge there. The scenery is probably the thing, one thing it has in common, but another thing is both are great for the country. If you love country, then obviously Humboldt doesn't have any big cities here. It's a lot of country. It's cow country. There's a lot of vegetable gardening and farming. It's big time cow country. Hawaii's not really the same. Hawaii's got a lot of tropical stuff, but if you like the country, Hawaii is great for agriculture. 365-day growing season. You grow papayas, mangoes, dragon fruit, all kinds of tropical fruit, and there's a lot of country living, there's a lot of farming. So if you're into agriculture, and for me those are some of the biggest things, is agriculture and weather. I love to farm, I love to grow things, I love to work with livestock. So I kind of made the move from Humboldt to Hawaii because for a couple reasons. One reason being the weather is just a little bit warmer. Another reason being that there's 365-day growing season, so it's just there's more to do in agriculture work in the winter. And another reason that I moved is culturally, Humboldt is pretty white. Sort of has a racist history in terms of kicking out native people and Chinese people back in the day, whereas Hawaii is predominantly mixed race, biracial or more. It's there's a lot of native people, there's a lot of Asian people, there are a lot of white people, there's not a lot of black people, but it's normal to like just be, it's pretty mixed, right? So that's another reason. There's a cultural difference. I come back here and I feel like I stick out a little bit. Not so much, but a little bit, whereas Hawaii I really blend in. And you know, that's for me, it depends on you. What else? Pros and cons. It depends where you are in Hawaii, but for the most part, Hawaii is going to be way more crowded. The Big Island is probably a little bit closer to Humboldt, but there's not a lot of tourism here in Humboldt. Well, there's not a lot of like people on vacation. The tourism you get in Humboldt is like the weed scene of you have usually young 20-somethings traveling from out of the country. They call them trimmigrants, especially in the fall and winter to do the harvest, the weed harvest, and do some of the grunt work. So you have like people coming in from that, but there's not a lot of, you don't get the experience in Hawaii of crowds of tourists. And depending on where you are, the type of person you like, it's can be detrimental. So for instance, the beaches here are beautiful, and you go out to Samoa, you go out to Mad River, you go out wherever, you might not see anyone for hundreds of yards, and there's giant empty beaches, beautiful to yourself. If that's what you like, you get that here. You don't get that in Hawaii. I don't know if there's anywhere you can go in Hawaii where you're going to get that. For the most part, I mean, obviously there's exceptions, but there's going to be big crowds. You're going to have to step over people. And yeah, I mean, when I'm here, I like to strip down naked and jump in the ocean. Can't really do that on some places in Hawaii. You can do that, but usually there's a lot of crowds. So if you want to ditch the crowd, like, look, I mean, there's some people here. This is even like a crowded place, but it's just a beautiful. What else can we say? Hawaii, depending on your social life, like socially they're way different. I said culturally they're different too. And I mean culturally, like it's not just white here; it's sort of European. And Hawaii does have quite a bit more, depending on where you are, but more indigenous or Pacific Asian cultures. But socially, it's a different experience. It's going to be different for everybody, but Hawaii is a lot more transient of a place. You have a lot more people travel through and visit, which is exciting for your social life. You get to feel like you travel by staying where you are. You might experience this by having a lot of your friends and family come out to visit. So you have an opportunity to host a lot of people. Or it also might be just meeting a lot of interesting people. But then you also have the experience of so many people moving from Hawaii back to the mainland or somewhere else. So a lot of the social investments you make are pretty transitory. And Humboldt, there's also a lot of travel to and from, but it's a lot more common for, I think there's less turnover in Humboldt. It makes sense from a big picture perspective because there's less tourism, and I think the nature of what oftentimes draws people to Hawaii or spits people out of Hawaii, it's people from Hawaii feel like they need to leave Hawaii for economic reasons. So I mean, there's an economic force that causes quite a bit of churn as well. So I mean, that's something that's interesting in the long term. Where in 4 years in Hawaii I've made so many friends, but so many of those friends have left. And then visiting back to Humboldt, it's like, it seems like all my friends are still here. I have more friends in Humboldt than I have in Hawaii, spending 4 years in each. Like quite a lot more. So that's interesting. I guess let's talk about money. Humboldt is cheaper in some ways and more expensive in other ways. At first glance, Humboldt is quite a bit cheaper, but maybe not. California, for some things. Hawaii is really expensive. It's really expensive. It's twice the average cost to live basically anywhere else. So it is expensive. The food is the thing that you'll notice the most. Food is crazy expensive. But it can be healthcare, it can be housing. It's a number of things. Taxes are high. So yeah, Hawaii is really expensive, and that's something that forces people out. But it's a combination of being expensive without that many high-paying jobs. There are a lot of jobs, but not a lot of tech jobs. Most of them are in tourism or agriculture or yeah, restaurant, transportation, that sort of a thing. So it's hard. It can be hard for people to make it work. We're gonna turn back the other way and go back to where we started. It can be hard to make it work for people, which contributes to the churn, but also is the lifestyle. It's the people work really hard to be in Hawaii. I mean, the older people who just come in with money and have their condos or whatever, but the younger people who live there, people work really hard to be there. Humboldt is a little bit of a different story. Food is definitely cheaper, quite a bit cheaper. Time I made this video, we'll see what it's like in 10 years, 5 years, but you know, we sell, you know, bananas are like, a lot of the food costs twice as much in Hawaii. So there's that. I mean, Hawaii's got a good market for used cars because people are leaving, so automobiles are pretty cheap is one thing. So I mean, it depends. One thing I noticed, Humboldt rent here is cheaper, but it's not a lot cheaper. Like renting a house is comparable, close to the same price. A 2-3 bedroom house with a yard is similar, because California's got a housing shortage that Hawaii does not. It's expensive to live in Hawaii, but the population of Hawaii has been decreasing as people have been leaving for economic reasons. So there's more of a housing surplus in Hawaii, and there's more of a housing shortage in California, which means that if you're just a single person renting or a family renting, it doesn't necessarily, it seems like it's not that big a difference. You can pay more in Hawaii, but you can find a lot of it to be comparable. That said, it's a lot cheaper. It depends where on the island, but in general, it's cheaper to own land in Humboldt. So if you want to rent, it's similar. If you want to own, Humboldt's way better. Land is crazy expensive. And Hawaii, especially on Oahu, is just out of control. There's so little of it. There's so many people. It's so dense. It's so packed. Here, there's just so much sprawling land. If you want to own land, then it's a better bet here. Taxes are higher in California. California and Hawaii have the two highest tax rates. They have income tax and they have capital gains tax. So that's one thing. Taxes are going to be more in Humboldt than in Hawaii. If you sell your Bitcoin, you're going to have to pay more here. You're going to have to pay a lot in both, though, because these are the two highest tax states. So that's another reason. And then the job market is not really, it's not really better here either, because it's not like there's a lot of high-paying jobs. So yeah, economically they're closer than you'd expect, but it's probably, for most people, is going to be a little bit cheaper to live here, especially if you want to just scrape by. We're talking about sort of average cost of homes. If you just want like a shitty room in someone's house, it's going to be a lot cheaper to do here than to do that in Hawaii. So economics. What else can we talk about? Travel. So, I mean, my experience, a lot more people will fly to Hawaii than they will drive down the West Coast, but you get both. So you're going to have people visiting you, but it's definitely, it's going to be easier to travel from Humboldt than it will be to travel from Hawaii, because even if it's like, oh, I'm closer to Asia, I can travel to Asia or Australia or New Zealand, it's still like an 8+ hour airplane or a, oh well,
Hi.
hi, or a 5+ hour airplane back to the mainland. So it's hard to leave the island. Whereas, I mean, once you're on the west coast, like, you can go anywhere in the mainland within 5 hours. That said, it's not way easier to travel from Humboldt because we don't have a major airport here. And I mean, yeah, you can fly from the Arcata Eureka Airport, but now you have an extra connecting flight. It's expensive, but it's definitely easier to travel from here. What else might people want to know about living in these places? We covered the cultural, we covered the social, we covered the economic, we covered the natural beauty. I guess last thing I'd say is that yeah, just the vibe. I think Hawaii is more of like an exciting vibe and Humboldt is more of a chill vibe. And obviously that's super generalization and depends where you are, but Hawaii, people are really grinding, people are really living it up. People are excited and grateful to be there. Humboldt's like just so chill. Not to say people don't grind and get excited here too. What else? Both places have drugs, like drugs and homeless, and economic and mental health illness. So it's hard to compare. One more thing, I guess, politically is I noticed coming back to the mainland, especially San Francisco, but Bay Area, now back here in Humboldt, that how political things are. People talking about politics, the left versus right, whatever, new policies. Whereas in Hawaii, like, it's not on people's radar nearly as much. I think the mainland feels so far away. It's the same country, but almost feels like a different country. The native Hawaiian kingdom has some support. It's on, on the radar a little bit. Like, people feel differently about the land. People aren't as engaged politically, it seems. And that's something that I really liked. Is, people are just it's partly because people are busy and have more of their own struggles. They're trying to make ends meet, but it's partly that it's like we're on this island, we don't really care about that. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is worst case scenario. Humboldt, we have, I guess the last couple fire seasons have been really bad. A couple weeks in the late summer, early fall, where the air quality is horrible. It sucks to go outside. So that could probably continue. There could be issues with water wars and stuff like that in the future. Whereas in Hawaii, we've had a number of hurricane scares since I've been there. Luckily, we've dodged them. But also, if we see aggression between the U.S. and China, then Hawaii is like the jeweled pawn of the Pacific, and we saw that in World War II with Japan fighting over Hawaii. And with nuclear warfare, it's a little scary too. So both places could have doomsday scenarios. So, gotta be ready to run if it comes down to it. Yeah. If you've lived in either of these places, comment down below if you think my characterization isn't good or there's something important that I missed. If you've lived in both of these places, then share some more insights, or if you think that I'm wrong or overgeneralized on something, I would love to hear. So please comment down below. Appreciate you. Much love. And yeah, if you want to ask questions about being here or living here, you can check me out on Instagram, Travis D. Woo, and DM me. And I might respond. Not 100%, but I usually do. Just talk, answer random people's questions. I don't mind. And yeah, but I mean, even if I do or don't respond, or you do or don't message me, just want to say I appreciate you and thank you for taking the time to sit here and watch this whole video with me. And if you made it all the way to the end, make sure you hit the thumbs up button so other people can see this video too. Okay, back to the car here, on with my day. Headed back to San Francisco, then to Colorado for a week, then back to Hawaii, back to the grind. All right, look out here, we got the marsh. It's a nice place. Okay, peace.